présentation, pour ceux qui voudraient avoir les présentations de ce matin, elles sont déjà publiées sur notre page Facebook. Pour ceux qui ne la connaissent pas, vous n'avez qu'à chercher CNUDST et faire j'aime par obligation. Et donc vous trouverez les présentations. On est en train de les mettre au fur et à mesure. Donc d'ici la fin de la session, toutes les présentations seront en ligne.
Merci pour revenir et pour prendre le café dans 15 minutes. Pour commencer, c'est pour 6 minutes, c'est une vidéo. C'est en anglais, mais c'est un très intelligent. Tout ce que vous pouvez lire là-bas, ce sont des informations ramassées par des surveys. Alors, ce sont des it's facts. حقائق ما هياش fiction. Alors, pensez dans ces idées. Ce sont des questions que vous avez dans votre esprit et خلينا نجاوب عليها مع أنتوني إن شاء الله. On a reçu des questions après la session. لو سمحت كل سؤال في دماغك أو في دماغك please demande-le à Anthony après cette session إن شاء الله. خلينا نسمع بعض ونشوف. Alors c'est juste un peu commercial في الآخر بس les idées les plus importantes de prendre de cette vidéo et quelque chose comme combien de gens travaillent dans une publication maintenant. C'est pas, tu peux pas faire de science seul. Il faut travailler avec beaucoup de gens. Il faut mettre un network des chercheurs from différentes nationalités. Parce que maintenant, en 2010, comme vous avez vu dans la vidéo, on a publié un article sur Science Directe qui avait 3222 auteurs from 70 pays dans un article, un seul article. Alors, c'est comme ça que la science est devenue multidisciplinary, lots of co-authors, différentes nationalités qui travaillent ensemble, et c'est la seule solution pour garantir des citations et garantir des bourses de monnaie pour votre recherche, pour votre pays. Alors c'est pourquoi, c'est comment on peut faire سمعة دولية. لازم تحطوا الحاجات ديت في الأذهان وانتوا بتشتغلوا في السيونس. هنسمع أكتر من الكلام ده من أنتوني وبوكو دي كيستيون إن شاء الله أتمنى في السيسيون اللي جاية. شكرا وخلينا نسمع أنتوني. أنتوني would you please start?
Okay, we're back. Afternoon. And now we go on to the next bit of the talk. We focused on the first three, and the next two bits are actually the mechanics and structure of writing an article, and then things around research ethics, publication ethics, and also your author rights. Again, a reminder, read the Guide to Authors. Again and again. Now, if there's one thing only that you leave this room with today, this is it. The wall. Very boring, maybe. It's the process of writing, how you build your article upwards. You do not start at the top and work down as you read it. This will save you hours of work. You have your research data. You've been collecting the experimental data. You've gathered it. You think you've got an idea what's going on. Okay. When you start writing all of your figures, tables in some form for a paper, that's the basis of your paper. Often, the figures and tables do not change. The text around them might change because of the refereeing process. That's the basis, the foundation. The next bit you write is the method. Again, if it's a method you've already got from someone else, you quickly cite that, it's very easy, or you're describing what you did in past tense. Then the results is the next stage you write. What you found. The next is the discussion around those results. And then comes your conclusion as to what it all means. Having done all of that, the introduction is next, putting it into perspective. And then the final thing is the title and abstract. So this, as I say, to me, is the most important slide of this afternoon. Because that makes it easier. If you do it the other way, you'll get to a certain stage in your writing and think, I haven't got that. And then you'll start to have to go back and do some more research or another experiment or some statistical analysis or something. And this fish I thought, nice, it's you've got a large ocean or a large sea here, so let's have a fish. The structure of a research article is normally reasonably standard. It has a head and a tail and the middle bit. Now, the important thing with the head, the title, the abstract and the keywords is everyone in the world can see those from any computer. So from that point of view, it has to be findable by machine, by Google Scholar, Scopus. Has to be Cyrus. Also has to be clear to the reader what it is. Then you have the body of the text, which is the mnemonic, the abbreviations IMRAD, Introduction, Methods, Results, Discussions, IMRAD. Then conclusion, acknowledgements, references, and data, supplementary data. This says here, journal space is not unlimited. Well, actually, it's not so important nowadays. 95% plus all research, reading is online. But your reader's time is important. Therefore, you're competing for so many minutes of their time. And so you've got to have this clearly and concisely. And that's the conflict, as I said. Now, in terms of authorship, who is an author? The idea is, Elsevier, like many publishers, uses the so-called Vancouver idea, concept. To be an author, you have to contribute to the concept, the design, the data analysis or gathering, interpretation. You've got to be involved in either writing, drafting the article and revision, or commenting on it. And also you have to give your approval of the final version. The whole combination is there. If you do not fulfill all three steps, you're not really an author. You're what's called an acknowledged individual. Now, some countries in the world have a different viewpoint on that, and that's, shall we say, some difficulties. But the basic idea is that people have to earn to be an author. They have to also be able to defend all the content in there because they're a co-author. They agree with it, they're responsible for it. Normally, the first author is the person who conducts or supervises this gathering of data, the measurement. They normally put the paper together. The corresponding author can be different, and often it's the last author that often is the senior author. And the senior author, they're called a corresponding author from the days when people wrote to them months or years later by regular mail with a postage stamp saying, can you explain this paper some more? And in the meantime, the younger graduate student who written the paper has moved on. So that's why the corresponding author is a person who replies to correspondence, either straight away or years later. What tends to happen sometimes, which is wrong, is you add authors who don't contribute. Some countries, I won't say which part of the world they're from, but sometimes the head of institute demands to be on every single paper published out of that institute because it's their budget, which is wrong. It has to be, they have to earn the right to be on the paper. So some authors also get added to papers by keen people writing it, thinking that if I can add an extra 2 famous people, it'll help me get published. It might do. But when that person sees the paper online in Science Direct or in PubMed and recognises they know nothing about the paper, they're unhappy. So it might be called a gift author, but in fact it's often not the case. And then the paper has to be retracted or something similar. A ghost author is also something you should be aware of. Supposing you have a 2-year project and some people were involved at the start of the project, gathering the data, setting up the experiment, and then they left, went somewhere else. And then you write the paper at the end of the experiment and you forget that 1 or 2 people helped out in setting up the experiment and in the first year. You should remember they have a right to be one of the authors too, in the middle somewhere, as a co-author. So you should contact that person whilst you're writing the paper and say, hey, the experiment's come to an end. We'll be sending you a proof draft, please comment on it. Obviously, you're one of the authors. And otherwise, what happens is that the paper appears, the person who helped you do that research for the first year and moved on, then contacts the publisher or the journal editor saying, hey, I should be a co-author there. What are you going to do about it? And we as publisher are asked to be a policeman to determine if that person should be on or not. And that's not good. So please be aware of ghost authors and gift authors. Anyone else comes at the end as acknowledged individuals, people who helped you polish the manuscript, helped you in terms of advising you, giving you materials, whatever. Now I'm going to go through a paper as if you'd read it, not as if you'd write it, as if you'd read it, and giving you a few tips, ideas. A title has to sum up in as few words as possible what's in there. It shouldn't be too grand, it shouldn't be too short. It should be honest, and its job is to attract suitable readers. Suitable, someone who will find the contents interesting. When you do a search in Scopus or PubMed or something, you see this whole list of titles, and you stop at one. Why? Because that title interested you. Something about it attracted you. It did its job. You then click on that and go inwards. So you put yourself in the same situation. Think, how would you make your title so that it's clear enough to the outside world? Here's 3 examples of titles sent in, and sometimes reviewers and editors help authors make it better, and sometimes they don't because they're too busy. So here, for example, is the first one was preliminary observations, blah, 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 blah. And the comment of the reviewer was it's too long a title, we should get rid of all the redundant things. And the reviewer's suggestion was that. Now that sums up effective zinc on anti-corrosion of the zinc plating layer very clearly, far better than the original title. Short, snappy, clear. The second one, action of antibiotics on bacteria, is not clear enough, because the editor in this case said, it doesn't help me because it doesn't say what's going on there. If you read the article, it's much more than that. So that is what the editor suggested to that author it should be. That's far clearer. Inhibition of growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis by streptomycin. So it's very clear to a reader interested in that sort of resistance what to do. The third one, editor-in-chief was furious. He says English needs help. The title is nonsense. Fabrication of carbon, cadmium sulfide, coaxial nanofibers displaying optical and electrical properties by electrospinning carbon. And his viewpoint was, well, all materials have properties of all varieties. my own hair has electrical and optical properties. So if there's something special there, tell the reader what's special. And again, that was the editor's suggestion, which actually is far clearer and explains exactly what the paper was about. Again, and you might have helpful editors. Do not rely on that. Do it yourself. Now, keywords, you move on from the, think of it, you have the title, keywords, abstract. In some journals it's title, abstract, keyword. It doesn't matter. Now, I'm not sure if you can read that, it's a bit indistinct. That would be a wonderful button to have on your keyboard that says keyword. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. So, the idea of keywords are for two reasons. One, it makes it easier for a reader to see if it's a useful piece of article to read. And secondly, it makes it easier for search engines to find information. So in effect, your keywords are search engine optimizing your article. They shouldn't be too general, shouldn't be too narrow. So when you are writing your article and thinking of keywords, type in those keywords as a string into Google Scholar or Scopus, and see how many hits you get. If you get 3 million hits, I'd say your keywords are too broad. If you get 1 hit, I'd say it's far too narrow. So just play with the different combinations of keywords until you get the right sort of articles that are similar to what you're writing about. This also has an extra benefit. Sometimes you come across papers you didn't know existed, and you can add them to your references to make your references more complete, to make your paper more effective. Now the abstract, of course, is important. Again, it can be seen by everyone in the world, everywhere. You have to tell your readers what you did. Remember, someone's clicked on the title, they've gone to the abstract next, and they're going to read that, and depending on what they read, if it's interesting, they'll read the rest of the article. If they don't read the article, they're never going to cite you. If they do read the article, they might cite you. So it's like a step-by-step process. You tell the readers what you did. Some journals are extremely strict. They say 50 words. That is, I won't say impossible, but very, very difficult. But most journals say around 200, 300 words is the range for an abstract. And also some journals, particularly the Elsevier ones, have what's called highlights or bullet points. Idea of doing several topic points underneath the abstract, and then the bullet points, the highlights. Make it clearer for the reader to see what your paper is about. It's an advert for your article, of course, because you're saying what's there, but it also has to be an honest advert. It mustn't be wrong. And a clear abstract helps get through the process of putting the paper out for peer review. Often an editor will decide, based on your abstract and your discussion and conclusions, if your paper is strong enough to send out for peer review. If not, it might be seen as too weak and not even go out for peer review. It's called a desk reject. More of that later. This is an example of an abstract. Here's what was done, and here's what was found. Very simple, very clear. Now after your abstract, you then have the introduction. The introduction, its job is to tell the readers you know what you're talking about and where your work, your research fits into the whole area around you. And if there's any questions specifically, like is there a particular problem, or are there problems with particular ways of doing things. Is this a solution to that? Or is a particular area you think is relevant to help a particular field? This is where it comes in introduction. But the important thing is it's not a history lesson. You're not going to be describing the whole thing. That can be left for a review article. Your job is in a few sentences to describe the background, the field, and where your work fits into it. So before you can present your results, you've got to paint the picture of the scenery, the landscape. You don't want to have all the various other bits in here, results, discussion. That's later. And you don't want to have also novel and first time and so on, because it might be, but you don't say that. That's not how scientists work. And again, use the right references which are appropriate to help a reader go deeper. Now, if you do use some previous work of your own, make sure you cite that. If you don't, it's called self-plagiarism. If you do have other work out there which is very relevant, great. If it's fringe, but it's by a famous person, leave it alone. It might be nice as an author to list a Nobel Prize winner or two in your references, but if it's the wrong field, the referees will say, look, this author hasn't got a clue. Why do they include those references? The job of the reference is to support your paper, nothing else. So having got your introduction, you then go on to your whole methodology. Now, if it's a simple standard method you're using, that's easy. You know, we did this protein separation as per the Lowry method, reference, finish, end. If it's quite complicated, you can go through the methodology very clearly. Now remember, you've lived this for months and months, and now you've got to somehow share it with a reader. If you know that one particular chemical supplier's product works and one doesn't, mention it. If you know that Sigma works but Roche doesn't, mention that. If you know that 96% purity doesn't work but 99% does work, mention it. Because you have to be detailed enough so someone else in the world can repeat your experiment with the information you've given them. If you leave a step out because it's convenient to, or you forgot, and they cannot reproduce your process, that's firstly made them annoyed, this reader. They wasted valuable time and money. And if they can't make your method work, why should they cite you? If they find your method interesting, they want to repeat your work, they will probably cite you. So it's important to get it right. If you use, again, if you know that a particular machine, say a certain HPLC machine works, but another one is not sensitive enough, mention the sensitivity problem in your paper. You're painting the picture, you're making it clearer so that a researcher will say, oh, okay, it's a great experiment, but I don't have that machine, the one I've got is not sensitive enough. All right, I understand. And so, again, you're trying to be helpful, but at the same time, you want to be enthusing people. Of course, you've got to have the normal control experiments mentioned, and also you write in the past tense. Now, this was done. If there's lots of material, say for example it's a new method and it's a whole protocol, very detailed, you do not want to put that perhaps in the main paper. You put that in the supplementary materials which you can send along with the paper. And the same thing, if you, for example, you have an interesting set of images and you pick the most interesting one for the paper, the other ones you can put in the supplementary. Now, reviewers, I'm not sure if you can see that because of the table, reviewers will often criticize incomplete or incorrect descriptions. They often are experts in this. They will see how you described your method and your experiment, and based on how you described it, they will see if it seems to be appropriate, effective, and validates the results you obtained. So therefore, you have to be very clear, but concise. This constant balance. Now, ethics, committee approval, in some areas, working with humans or animals, there are certain ethical standards. Now, there are national standards, there are regional standards, there are international standards. And the international one, for example, is the Helsinki Declaration. And if you do have local ethical committee approval, state that either in your paper or in the covering letter when you send it to the journal, because that's important that there is this ethics committee aspect. Because, as we know, research has to be ethical as well as ethically correct in publishing aspects. Now then you move on to your results, sharing those. Now the important thing, you've done months and months and months of research, lots of results. You're going to select some of those results. Which ones? The ones that are appropriate. The main findings, not everything, because otherwise it would be too big a paper. You shouldn't leave anything out that's relevant. So the main findings and anything that's different to what you'd expect, or different to what scientists would expect. If you think that's interesting, mention it. If you think, oh, but other people haven't found that, I must be wrong. If you check the results, you're sure what you found is there, your co-authors are sure, then say, contrary to what has been found before, reference this, reference that, we found this. So what you're saying, in effect, is we have built on previous work with new material. And that's how science advances, step by step. And again, remember, your statistical analysis has to be there, because otherwise it could be that your results are meaningless. And without that, the referees would be unhappy people. If you can, with your results, try to use a figure or figures and tables. Because if you have a table or a figure, you don't need to describe it in text. It's one or the other. And a figure gets far more information in it than some text, or one table also. A table should be short, not a huge table, just what's relevant. And the figure captions and the legends also have to be very clear to describe. So if someone, a reader, looks at a picture, a figure, reads the caption, and they can understand that, that's done the job of a paragraph, maybe, or two. As you can see here, a picture is worth 1,000 words, absolutely. But make sure that your picture works. Here we suggest uncrowded plots. Very simple. 3 to 4 data sets per figure. Simple, correct scales. And the symbols are easy to read. Each photograph should have a scale marker. Of course, we shouldn't have this non-English there. Now, use colour only when necessary. Now, why is that? Colour is free on the web. Of course it is. We don't charge for colour. No one does. But you are forcing the reader to use a colour printer, and they might not want to. Now, if you do want to do colour, fine. If you do not do it like this, which is purple and pink, you have triangles and squares and also colour. So those who print it in black and white can see what it is. Those who print it in colour can also see what it is. So you have the choice. So online, it looks visually nice, and you're not forcing the reader to use an expensive colour printer. So again, think of the reader. It's if you, as an author, think of yourself as having responsibility. If someone reads your article and doesn't understand it, they weren't at fault. You were, because you weren't clear enough in explaining to them. So again, if you can be as clear as you can, at the same time, do it in a way that causes them the least inconvenience, they'll hopefully thank you for it, cite you, whatever, contact you. Okay. On here, of course, you need to have little lines here with text to explain what's going on, or else without that, you wouldn't know what's going on. So again, this little idea that says drug crystals, for those who can't read that. Clarity. Now moving to the discussion. Now the discussion is interesting. What's the difference between a researcher and people who are not researchers? People who, for example, are lab technicians, or people who have done science at high school and then moved on to other jobs. A researcher gathers information, thinks about what's going on, explains it in a discussion. This is what differentiates you as a researcher to non-researchers. You can explain what you think is happening. And your explanation is your chance to sell your data, to be known, to be linked to that. And for many young investigators, young meaning junior, not many publications, often the discussion isn't as strong as it could be. And that's why editors often look at the discussion to see, have they changed from being a lab technician to being a researcher? Can they discuss properly the results? Can they have meaning to it? But the discussion should be very clear. The discussion should actually reflect what you found. It shouldn't be different. So if you found certain things, they should be there in the discussion. There shouldn't be other things discussed there. That's for a future paper. If there's problems with your machine or your technology or whatever, mention it as a limitation for discussion. We think this is happening, our machine has this capability or this level of sensitivity, so fine. Perhaps other people will find other things. And of course, do not go beyond what the results support. If you find A, B, C, do not say in your discussion, because we found A, B, C, D, E must be the case. Not necessarily. So be clear, but also be very, very firm in what you think is happening. So your conclusions sum up all the other things. It's the global, specific conclusions, where you think it could be used. And one thing that is a good tip is you suggest future experiments. Like, we have found these things. Obviously, more work has to be done in these areas. So you're telling the world you haven't discovered everything. But what you can also do at that point, you can say, we suggest these further experiments take place, and we're already busy doing some of these. So what you've done, you've told the world, here's what we found, and here's what we're working on. So you've claimed that area. And that's very useful, because if other people read your work, and they're working on that too, they may well come to you and say, we know you're working on this, we read your paper, can we collaborate with you in your current research and co-write a paper together? As I said, the more institutes out there combine and collaborate, the better quality of paper and the more citations. So by just perhaps indicating what you think still has to be done and you're doing some of it, keeps the door open for people to approach you. And again, the conclusion must not be a summary. That's what the abstract is for. And also, you should not judge how it's going to be. This is wonderful, this is world-shattering. No. It's up to the people who cite you to say how wonderful your paper is, not you. And then, of course, you have the references. Now, the references' job is to support your way of thinking, your methodology, your logic process, and at the same time, it's to tell the world what is out there to support how far you've got to. So if someone doesn't know your field, they can read all the references and then know a lot more, which helps them if they found your article so useful but didn't know about certain things. So your job as an author is to draw attention to these extra papers. And that is very convenient because it saves you having to do the work by saying, this has been done before, or this, as so-and-so showed, reference 4, and you're describing it, then references do their job perfectly. The Guide to Authors tells you how to style the references. It's always different from journal to journal. And try to get the author names correct, year of publication, and so on, because if you were an author, and you are, you'd like your paper to be cited properly. If it's cited improperly, you may miss a citation. So be nice to the people you're citing, just as you'd like them to be nice to you when they cite your work. If you can, try not to cite personal communications or unpublished work, because it's difficult for other people in the world to have access to that information. And sometimes editors even ask for this information to make sure it really is there. And if possible, also try to cite articles that are published in a major language, preferably English, because again, for the readers worldwide, if you cite a particular article in a particular language, it does limit them. There's a limit to how many people can read that language in the worldwide scientific arena. Now, in the print journal, there are still print journals out there. The quality of the print is dropping a bit because nowadays it tends to be digitally printed. But the online journal is the way forward, and the extra material there is called the supplementary material. It's at the end of the article, and if you are using supplementary files, make sure each supplementary file has a caption, because that makes it easier for the reader to know what's going on, and for Scopus, Cyrus, Google Scholar, and so on to find this information clearly. And so it's a useful way to add data to your particular article. Some journals ask referees to look at the supplementary data and also referee that, others do not. It varies from journal to journal, and that often is not stated. So assume it's going to be looked at by the referees. I covered that earlier, the length of an article. Again, it's the idea of simple, it's the basis of what to do. Abbreviations I covered earlier. Now here's something that's very, very different. The covering letter. Now some journals do not ask for a covering letter. It's part of the electronic submission system, this little box where you can type something in. But it's, in effect, it's something that does not get published. It does not go to the referee. It's only seen by the editor, the handling editor. It might come into the editor-in-chief and then go to the handling editor. But what it is, it's your explanation of why you sent the paper in. It's submitted along with your manuscript, it should mention why you sent your paper to this journal. Why? Because it happened to be high impact? No. Because I like the name? No. Because your paper is relevant to the readers of that journal. The editor's job is to keep the quality high of what gets into the journal, but also to make sure there's enough interesting material for the audience of that journal, the readers. And so what you're saying to the editor is, this would make a good paper in your journal because it fits the audience. Also, you should say, if you're not asked separately in the submission system, which referees should perhaps be good people to review your paper. So you think, okay, who would be a good person to review my paper? You do not want to pick someone in the lab, someone you've worked with previously, your mother-in-law. You do not want to pick any of those people. You want to pick the top people in the field who you have no individual dealings with currently. By currently we mean 2 years typically. And then that suggestion, and some journals say 2, some say 4, some say 6 suggestions. And that does 2 things. It helps the editor decide where to send the paper out to. And secondly, it tells the editor you know who are the top people in your field. So it's actually not exactly a trick question, because sometimes it is used. Some editors never use your suggestions, but always see what you've said to see who you think are good people. So it tests your knowledge of the field. If you know there's a group somewhere else working on this, how do you know that? Because you've done some scopus analysis, you check the lab website, you know they're researching this. You think, I'd rather it didn't go to this lab, or that lab, because they're currently working on that, and that will be a conflict of interest, and you don't want to put those potential referees in that situation. So you can give a list of a few names to editor-in-chief and say, please, I respectfully ask you, do not send this paper to those places for peer review because. And most journal editors are very good about that. Now, sometimes, if you perhaps get a bit too long a list, say 30 or 40 or 50 names where you don't want it sent to, the editor might say, this is strange. Why does this author not want it to go to all these people? And they'll specially send it to 1 or 2 of those people to find out why. Because they think it's not quite so transparent as it should be. Again, everyone's human. Here's an example of a covering letter. Simple. This goes to the editor-in-chief, and this is a final approval of all authors. It's suitable, it's important, it's suitable for your readers. Here's some suggestions of referees. Thank you very much. Very simple. 1 page. And I said, you should not have close friends. If you can, try to have reviewers from at least 2 different regions of the world. That also shows that you are very internationally focused. What an editor will often do is they will look at your introduction, see the references in that introduction, and use those people as potential referees. Or they'll find the latest citation, the youngest, a year or 2 old maybe, and write to that reviewer, that person, and say, someone's just cited your work in a paper, and here's the abstract. Do you want to review it? And people think, I wonder why they cited my work. How interesting. Yes, I will take up this suggestion. I will agree to review this paper. So it's interesting how these things work. So you've done all of your various things. You've written, you've polished, and then you come to the point of pushing this button, submit. This is an interesting flowchart. Most of you probably haven't a clue how it works, just to submission. Well, think of me like pulling the curtain back and saying, here is how it works. It seems complicated, but in fact it's pretty easy. You submit the paper, it goes to the editor. The editor says, okay, is this within scope? Does it fit what I want my journal? Does it no obvious typos in the abstract and so on? If it's not within scope or it's poor quality, it gets rejected straight away. If it looks okay, the editor chooses the referees, 2, 3, 4, typically 2 or 3. The referees get it and they're asked to review on a certain timeline, and then they give a recommendation. The editor-in-chief collects the referees' comments, the reviewers' comments, and then based on those comments, makes a decision. So if, for example, one says accept as is, one says accept with minor revisions, or one says also the same, then normally they'll go with the worst version, as it were, the minor revision. If two say reject and one says accept as is, then it's very strange, and they'll often ask another person, often someone from the editorial board, to review the paper as a sort of a tiebreaker. And then, having got all the information, they make a decision. The decision could be reject, it could be accept as is, or it could be revision. If you revise the paper and then it goes around again. It's quite a simple thing, really. To even get into the peer review process, you've got to get past the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief likes keeping his or her referees happy. And so, if you ask any referee, why do you referee? Oh, it's great, I get cutting-edge material. Oh, really wonderful. Or what do you hate about refereeing? Getting all the junk. And so it's the editor's job to stop the junk going out to the referees. So they will do the triage, they will do the desk rejects straight away and decide what doesn't go out. And that then is called an editorial decision, or a desk reject, or a reject without review, or other similar phrases. And if your work is poor quality in terms of content, that may well be rejected at that point. And some journals have 30 or 40% desk rejects. So the more you can make your paper better and clearer, the more likely you are to get through that process into the peer review process. Because in effect, you want to get that way, not that way. If your first decision was accepted as is, great. Very rare. 1 in 200 typically. Some fields 1 in 500. So if you do get accepted straight away, yay! No, you bake a cake. Everyone in the lab gets a piece of cake. We wait for the page proofs. Everyone's happy. Of course, the next paper, 6 months later or a year later, may not have the same royal treatment, and that might be not good for your ego, but that's life. If you get rejected straight away, it happens to everyone, even Nobel Prize winners. Try to understand why. Look at the advice, and then rewrite the paper based on the advice, and submit it to the next journal using the guide for authors, the new guide for authors. So again, it's that process. Sometimes it might take you 4 attempts to get accepted. Now, that's better than 3 attempts and it's rejected all the time. Because if each time you improve it slightly, it gets better and better, and it goes to the right journal eventually. Because if everything is in Google Scholar, Scopus, PubMed, whatever, as long as you get published, you're findable. Therefore, if you're findable, you're citable. Most papers do not get accepted straight away or rejected straight away. They go into this process called revision. It can be a minor revision or a major revision. A minor revision means a few small things have to be addressed. It does not guarantee acceptance, but it's more than likely. About 90%, 95% of papers get accepted with minor revision decision. Now, a major revision means the referees have found some great science tucked in there. And somehow they've got to try and get you to bring it out in a form that people can understand. And sometimes they may even ask you to do an extra experiment or something to clarify the process. So, let's go backwards a couple of times. So, if it was a minor revision, you then goes back to the editor, and often the editor looks at the minor changes you've been asked to make, and then makes a decision straight away, yes. If it was a major revision requested, normally it goes back out to the same referees to see if they're happy with the changes you've made. So that's important. So the referee sometimes does not see the paper second time around if it is a minor revision. Now when you do your revision, it's taking you months to pull it all together. Do not immediately rush together some revision and send it off. Do it carefully, clearly, and wait a bit of time. You normally have all the various comments of the referees, one after the other, and then you go through them, and then each of the points, and then you decide what you want to change. You're probably the scientist in the world who knows best about this experiment. These two referees, or three referees, know an awful lot, and perhaps most of their suggestions are helpful. So if they say, referee 1 says, point 1, do this, point 2, this, point 3, something else, and you think, okay, I can do those. If they say, point 4, this, no, I don't agree with that. No. We'll get back to that. And then, so what you do is you make all the changes you want to make in the manuscript, and then in the response letter with it, you reply point by point to the editor. Now, dear editor, thank you for giving me the chance to revise my paper. Referee 1.1, I agree with these points, I've made the changes. Point 2, and so on. I've made extra figure, or whatever you've done. Just make the point. You're describing clearly to the editor and the referees what you've done. If you didn't like one of the things, you thought it was inappropriate, you don't say to the editor, that referee's an idiot. You say very clearly, the point that this referee's making, I disagree with, and I rebut that point. It's called a rebuttal. Very clear. It should be a very clear rebuttal about why you think your explanation, conclusion, or results stand despite what that referee is thinking. And if you're clear enough and convincing enough to the editor-in-chief, often they will let that point stand and let you publish your paper with that thing in there, because that's how science develops. That's what it's all about. So the occasional rebuttal, if most of the time the suggestions are very good. Occasionally they miss the point, in which case you can use the rebuttal, but remember, whatever you write, be polite, because that will be forwarded to the reviewer. So you don't want to say, the reviewer doesn't know what they're talking about, here's why. Just say, well, I'm convinced that this is more appropriate, here's my explanation, I hope you agree with me. and will accept the revised manuscript with this point unchanged. And that works most of the time. It's worthwhile remembering that. Take time to do the changes. Remember, you are not the only author. Most of you are to be co-authors. Share your revision or your changes you want to make with your co-authors. Get their agreement. When everyone agrees with the new version, send it in. Because you do not want, say you have 4 authors, you do not want to make the changes on your own and these 3 people not know. They saw the first paper, the first draft, they haven't seen the final one. So always share every step with your co-authors, wherever they are in the world. If you do get rejected, well, you move on to the next journal. And if at a certain point you say, okay, I give up, this is too many, you put that to one side and you incorporate that in your next article as extra material. It doesn't go away, it can be recycled. So about 50% of all papers get rejected by the first journal. Working through the list, about 80% of them get accepted totally. If you have a strong manuscript using all these tips and tricks, your rejection rate should be closer to 0. I can't guarantee that, but at the same time, strong manuscript, no errors, should help. It should make it easier for you. Here's a little, what we call it, acceptance. So that's by one of the editors of one of our journals. Attention to details. Check and double check your work. Consider the reviewer's comments. English as good as possible. Presentation important. Take your time with the revision. Acknowledge those who've helped you. New, original, and previously unpublished work. Be critical of your own manuscript and be ethical. And that's the idea of acceptance. So that's a nice way of thinking about it. So remember, there's a lot of material here, tremendous amount of material. And that all will be available sometime next week as a PDF for you. So that's, don't worry too much. Now there's another area you as an author have, is your responsibility in terms of publishing ethics. Briefly, it used to be you have to publish or perish, but if you are unethical, you publish and perish. There's a set of ethics, international publishing ethics, which have to be listened to and used as guidelines by everyone in the scientific world. And it can go wrong, and so therefore it's worthwhile just paying attention. Remember at the beginning I said every paper you publish adds to your publication list, your passport. Now supposing 1 or 2 of those papers were a bit dubious, that never goes away, it's always there. So that affects your passport. The major area which is really outside of publishing really is the area of falsification of results, and we've had that in various parts of the world. And you have publication misconduct, certain things that are allowed, not allowed. Plagiarism is, all those things are wrong. Duplicate publication, duplicate submission, who should be acknowledged, who should be co-authored, and conflict of interest. Some of those I've mentioned already. The major international scientific ethics are higher than national ethics. And there's all sorts of different bodies that maintain and monitor these various things. Unfortunately, because of certain pressure in certain parts of the world, there's more and more problems being found out. Say fabrication, not good, because of course people try to reproduce the experiments with all the various costs of time, people, money, and that wastes a tremendous amount of scientific effort, and that's not good at all. So it's fabrication. Falsification is making up the results just to make it fit your theories. Here, so we can read that at the back. Chinese scientists dismissed after 70 suspect papers. So we have a whole bunch of chemists in India also falsifying papers, and these people get found out, and they lose their job, and they have to leave science, typically. Plagiarism is copying someone else's work, or even copying your own work. It's interesting that before you were a researcher, you were encouraged to copy. As a little child, you were taught how to write certain letters, so you wrote them down on a piece of paper with a pencil. You copied the teacher. And then you would be copying something out of a book. Then as a bit bigger child, you'd be doing a school project where you'd get certain bits and pieces from the internet and you'd cut and paste them with a few photos. That's your project. You'd be marked on that. Great. Then you go a bit further, and then suddenly you become a researcher. And suddenly the rules change. You can't do that anymore. But often no one has told you the rules have changed. You can copy someone else's work if you use quotation marks. You can copy someone else's work, preferably by citation. And you can copy your own work, again, with quotation marks. You can paraphrase a method or something, but otherwise, you're not supposed to do it. If you've got the material out there with the click of a button, why copy it? You don't need to anymore. Just references. So plagiarism is copying someone else's material without reference to them, or in such a way it looks like it's your ideas or your research. And it is not good. It doesn't actually go away. Now, duplicate publication is when you have published something earlier and then you publish your next work based on that without citing that work. Now, some people, some parts of the world say, well, I didn't want to reference all of my previous papers because it would appear I was being very big-headed and telling everyone how many papers I'd published. So that's why I missed those two out. No, everything that's relevant to that article you're submitting has to be referenced. If it is your own work, all right. So for duplicate publication, you do not. You just say, work done previously, reference, and then references to your previous work. We found this, and now with new work, we found this. So that's the important thing. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get the balance between if you had a good description of exactly how a problem was, and there's no better way of saying it, you put speech marks around it, quotation, and a reference. So everyone knows it was published before, and that you want to use the same words exactly again, on purpose. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't know, because you want to share with the reader your idea that that particular phrase is the best way of saying it you could think of. So, if you publish something in, say, an abstract, of proceedings. Is that previous publication? No. Sometimes some journals will say, the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, that you have to state you had published this before as an abstract for a poster or whatever, and they will take that into consideration. Most journals do not have that distinction. Their viewpoint is, if you published it as an abstract because it was a poster, that doesn't count. If you publish something in a certain language and it's extremely well received in that country or that language area, and it's well cited, and you think the rest of the world would appreciate that in English, you can republish it with a few certain steps. You need permission of the place you first published it, that journal. You need to write to the journal you want to publish in saying, I published this in the past in Arabic, or Chinese, Spanish, and I want to republish this in English in your journal. Is that acceptable? If they say yes, you can do the translation, and then you just put as a first reference your original article in the language it was, as a first reference. So you can republish material across languages with permission of all parties concerned. That's important. And if you also include, when you're submitting, some references to your work, articles in press, then sometimes the journal editor will ask you for copies of those papers that are in press to make sure they really are appropriate references. Now we at Elsevier are part of the Cross-Ref consortium, which is multiple publishers, and that creates the cross-check program. Now, there is a system called Turnitin or Authenticate. It's two different processes using the same sort of database. All the various publishers, 50 plus publishers, put all the articles into one database. That's used for the cross-ref linking of references. But it's also now used for the cross-checking of duplicates. So there's around about 20 million articles in there, and everything's in there, and that helps to spot plagiarism. And apart from that, apart from the computer knowledge, the referees are extremely knowledgeable about certain areas. And sometimes your colleagues might say, hey, that person's published this. That was something earlier that he did with me, so that's a duplicate. And also there are people out there who make a sport of looking for duplicates. They're called Retraction Watch, is one of them. And so they're actually looking for duplicates using various programs on the web like ET Blast, and then they ask publishers and editors to look into the similarities and withdraw papers. So there are all these various processes out there, because at heart, science and scientists want to be accurate. So it might be that a paper gets taken away 5 years later because it was wrong, or there was an error, or there was cheating going on. So in general, science is self-correcting. And most, I think all scientists really have this viewpoint that science must be accurate. And so that's why you can get retractions of papers years later to correct science. Here's a printout of 2 articles using cross-check. The colours are the same text. So this particular author, first published in 2003 in an Elsevier journal, then published in 2004 in another journal, another publishing house, and cross-check found that that text was identical to that text, that was the same as that, and that was the same as that. So I think you could say that that was about 70% overlap. So that paper was withdrawn. What does withdrawn mean? In the old days, meaning more than 5 years ago, there was a ruling that if something was wrong, it was removed electronically, disappeared, gone. And now the rules have changed internationally, and it's not come from us, it's come from government departments. And they say we must not take it away, we must tell the world it's no longer valid. So we have the phrase retracted. So the HTML version, this has been blanked out just to protect the people's names. You can still look them up if you want to. So on the HTML version, it says it's been retracted and why, identical to something published elsewhere. On the PDF version, is the watermark saying it's retracted. And that never goes away. Not good for collaboration. Actually, this is very out of date. This is a pharmaceutics author in Italy who decided that because he was caught cheating and was thrown out of his job, he wouldn't publish anymore. Not surprising. This is from February 2011. A German minister found that his doctorate was plagiarized, and so his doctorate was withdrawn, and so he had to quit. Now, 2 weeks ago, in Hungary, the same thing happened. The president of the country of Hungary was found that his paper on Olympic sport had been plagiarized from another author in another language. He'd done a very good job of translation. And so the university stripped him of his PhD, and last week he resigned. So the president of Hungary just stepped down because of something years earlier being found out. So it's interesting, these things do not go away. Now, it sounds very gloomy and bad. Certain things, you know, are acceptable, certain things aren't. It's knowing what you can do. When can you cite someone in inverted commas? When can you change a figure? When can you not do it? And knowing the rules makes it easier for you to stay within the rules. If you've got the figures and you can change them to a degree, here's what you can do. You can change the brightness, the contrast, the colour, and so on. And you must mention it in the figure legend. What you mustn't do is move things around or take up spots or change the gamma across one part of the image or whatever. So again, certain things are allowed, but one important thing, always keep your master image. Keep it somewhere in your lab file, backed up on a DVD somewhere, because if you've changed the master file, no one can prove to themselves or to you that you have both versions, the good file and the one that makes it easier to understand. Some journals, in cell biology particularly, insist if you change a file, that you send in the original as well as supplementary data. So the reader can see, here's what you got, you changed it a few ways to make it easier to explain to the reader, but the original file is still there. That's very important. Here's some figure manipulation that shouldn't happen. It's a few years back, it's still relevant. American Journal of Pathology, 2001. These were published. Okay. A different combination of co-authors in 2004, Journal called Life Sciences, took this, added a spot with Photoshop, added a spot here with Photoshop, and there, and there, rotated this around differently, changed the magnification, and that was what they thought was an interesting new set of images to explain the work they were doing. It wasn't spotted at the time. However, when the same group of co-authors took the same image and reversed it upside down in the same journal a few months later, it was spotted, and that one were withdrawn, and that one, there was a little note underneath that it was an expression of concern by the editors that these people were not necessarily as trustworthy as they could be in terms of figures. So that's interesting. So, moving entirely away, because I know you're going to be very ethical in the future, I'm sure of it. Great. And once you've got your paper, what can you do with it? Well, you've got it, right. It's a PDF. You print out lots of copies, and you give them to your friends. You send them electronically to everyone. You frame it on the wall. You give it to your mother. Wonderful, great. What else can you do with it? Because as an author warranty, the publisher agreement means that you say that when you're submitting, it's original, you got permissions and so on, and everyone agrees with that. Because of that, you then are given certain agreements. Certain countries, for example, won't let you transfer copyright. You just transfer use. Now, as an author, you retain the right to use your work, distribute it everywhere for teaching, reuse it everywhere, all the various figures, the tables, everything, anywhere else in the future. That's your work. You have the right to do that. You can make, look, this is Elsevier. Most publishers are similar. You can make as many copies as you want to hand out as teaching. You can send them to anyone you want as your part of your research community. It can be included as company training or in university course notes. Say, it can be sent to anyone. You can hand it out at meetings. Anyone you meet, hey, see my latest paper? Cite me. And again, you can put it into book form or everything else. And of course, in your thesis or dissertation. Because in some countries, say Scandinavia, you're supposed to publish 4 papers. Those 4 plus introduction is your thesis. That's a very simple system they do there. So you've got to have the rights for those, and you do. And of course, you have patent rights. If you want to post things online, slightly different. We say the pre-print version. That means anything up to when we did the typesetting on it, you can put anywhere. And again, this revised personal version of the text can go onto the institutional website or server. And also you have certain allowances in terms of different funding bodies. It varies from country to country, and it's varying from month to month. These things are changing. It's a shifting process. What we say I think is reasonable is that if we don't want companies to post articles on their website or to print lots of copies and sell them on. We think that's not fair use. And we also don't think that authors should charge fees to receive, like, I'll sell you my PDF. That's not how it works. So again, free distribution to all the various people you want to, all these people, research colleagues, institutions, teaching, no problems whatsoever. Charging for it, not so good. So I think that's... Then here, we've got a whole bunch of references, far too many for you to worry about. and further reading, you can't even read from the back. That'll easier to read in the PDF you're going to get. I think that's about it. So, thank you for your time.
We have the lunch. So the lunch is offered in the canteen. So the French, switching to French. Please. تفضلي. ممكن.
We're actually on time.
We are on time. We can use
Wow.
like 5 minutes.
Absolutely. Later in the day, we'll have questions and answers for those who are staying. I'm happy now to answer questions and during lunch also, privately.
Nice to see you. Thanks. So I have a question. When you ask to choose reviewer, do you really consider our choice, or you admit your own criterion?
I'm a publisher. I'm not an editor. Editors have the right to do what they want in the peer review process. But typically, when I ask my editors, I'm one of many publishers in Elsevier. Elsevier has 2,500 journals, and I look after 14 of those, only 14. Now, I say, do you use these people? And some say, rarely. Some say, always. Some say, I'll pick half of mine and half of the author's suggestions. Another one said to me, if I know people, I will choose them. If it's a particular specific area I'm not that sure of, I'll be guided by the author's suggestions. So every single one is different. So there's no one or other answer, but in effect, if you put names there, assume they may well be used, and interestingly, often the author's suggestions are tougher referees than the editor's suggestions. That's strange. Okay.
Any other questions?
No, no.
Est-ce que tu peux
Bonjour. Je vais poser ma question en français.
Oui.
Parce que mon anglais est très limité. Donc, ma question est par quels moyens et suivant quels critères constituant les commissions chargées de l'évaluation des travaux scientifiques et comment s'assurer de la compétence des évaluateurs dans le domaine ou l'application que comporte l'article scientifique que nous proposons. Donc voilà, c'est les critères, le moyen et les critères pour la formation et la constitution des commissions chargées de l'évaluation des travaux et des publications.
Pour l'éditeur, pour Elsevier.
Oui.
Ok.
C'est une question un peu de curiosité, voilà. Je ne suis pas encore chercheur, donc
Okay.
c'est une question qui me vient.
Non, ma fiche question, ma fiche سؤال ما هوش le système est le système est très simple. C'est pas une commission, c'est pas le système c'est tu penses d'une revue scientifique, tu examines le guide d'auteur, author guides, et le moment que tu fais les suggestions des noms pour les référés, c'est pas votre responsabilité, c'est la responsabilité du peer review system. Le système est simplement que toutes les revues scientifiques veulent que la science que tu présentes est originale, est authentique et c'est pas fabriqué. Alors c'est notre responsabilité de choisir les gens qui valident tous les résultats. Ce n'est pas votre responsabilité, c'est notre responsabilité. La valeur d'un éditeur comparé à l'autre, c'est ça. C'est pourquoi ce Elsevier est un des top éditeurs du monde. Parce que tous les éditeurs et tous nos systèmes sont strict. Alors ça répond à votre question.
Je trouve que c'est subjectif.
C'est subjectif.
Oui.
De quelle manière?
La relation est un peu subjective. Ça tend vers la subjectivité de l'objectivité.
Ok.
Parce que non, je ne sais pas si on a après recours, on peut après avoir les noms, par exemple, des professeurs qui ont évalué le travail. Je ne sais pas.
Ok. Il y a des différents. C'est un peu بعيد شوية عن الموضوع, mais il y a trois différents systèmes de review. So you have, tu as quelque chose qui s'appelle double blind, and you have the single blind, and you have the open.
I'll be doing that after lunch.
We're doing that after lunch. So, alors, si tu restes un peu après pour la deuxième session, l'autre session, ça va répondre ça en détail. Mais je t'assure, c'est pas subjectif parce que les gens qui font le review sont des chercheurs, des enseignants. Alors, si vous voulez prendre les autres questions dans l'autre après le manger.
Le repas aura lieu au deuxième étage. C'est un restaurant en terrasse. Donc, s'il vous plaît, munissez-vous juste de vos badges que vous devez présenter à l'entrée. Et bon appétit dès maintenant.
Et on revient à 2h15. Ok? Merci.
معناتها les éditeurs الكل عندهم دي معناتها ils forment enfin ils forment مش ils forment voilà ils collaborent avec des professeurs معناها pour évaluer justement les travaux de ceux qui le publient معناتها donc هذاك علاش peer reviewed معناتها register
احنا باش ندخلوا على سيرفيس ديريكت على الاكسي
انت
قريت اليسكا قريت اليسكا يعني فما un mot de passe ولا je dois être à l'ISKE je peux pas le faire à la maison
فما un mot de passe pour l'ISKE donc pour l'ISKE ما نعرفش شكون الكورديناتور خاطر احنا cette année on a formé des on a constitué معناتها comment dirais-je voilà des coordinateurs pour chaque établissement comme ça notre classe le coordinateur هو يعطيك le mot de passe بالنسبة للزبير
on peut le faire chez nous
oui pour الزبير mais sinon à partir de l'établissement vous avez je me retrouve à partir avec l'adresse IP خاطر toute la plage d'adresse IP chaque établissement reconnue معناها تدخل من
merci
بحق نجي جامي في نحسب حسب من الكورديناتور نتاع الباتريسكا و 80%